and welcome to mini episode 49 of Real Life Ghost Stories.
How you do?
To kick things off this week, we've got two gorgeous birthdays. We would like to say a massive happy birthday to Hayley from Austin, Texas.
Happy birthday, Hayley from Austin, Texas.
And also to Tremaine Darnell.
Happy birthday, Tremaine Darnell.
Hope you guys have amazing birthdays and that you're having a wonderful time, whatever you're doing and wherever you are in the world.
Absolutely. I don't think I should repeat them though in future.
Why?
It seems a little bit stupid. You say it and I say exactly the same thing.
Well, at least they know it's definitely them.
That's true.
So I've got some stories for you today.
Uh-oh.
And story number one comes from Katrina. I've had experiences throughout my life with paranormal activity, or whatever you would like to call it. I try to always find a way to debunk it, but some instances are harder to debunk than others. There is a saying somewhere that people are haunted, not places. And I'm not too sure how true that is, but I feel like I've always been aware of something not of our world at times. As a kid, I spent a lot of time with a friend in her grandma's house. We had several experiences with seeing weird things, items moving, or water turning on when we were the only ones at home. Everyone in that house had stories about different experiences. Even my friend's mother had stories of toy trains turning on when no one was upstairs, or windows opening in the dead of winter. So I know there are always possibilities. We recently moved into a new house, and I felt as though I was being watched at times. We first noticed one door would not stay shut. I heard different thumps that were unexplained, or items falling that couldn't have without help. Even the smell of perfume that wasn't mine. And our cats sometimes will watch something we can't see. One night I woke up at around 4 a.m. to a flashing light on a shelf. I said, "What is that?" And my husband got up and walked to the shelf, and it was a little bow tie for St. Patrick's Day that has flashing lights when you push a button. At that point I said out loud that I don't mind if there is someone here, but I needed to stop scaring me and the cats, and to not wake me up. I still heard taps and knocks and smelled the perfume once in a while, but otherwise it has calmed down, and the cats will still sometimes watch something we can't see. My husband's mother died in the summer of 2018 after a battle with cancer. She was a wonderful woman. We went to spend Christmas with his family in France the same year. His dad had experienced the shutters that are electric and require a remote to opening one night at around 3 a.m. He said her name and they stopped. The house is warmed by a wood-burning stove, so it can be chilly in the bedrooms at night when the fire dies down. I woke up one night feeling hot, so I pulled one leg from under the blankets to try and cool off. I was still awake, but noticed that the room smelled different. I wrote it off as a smell from the blanket or the pillow, and then I felt it. It was a soft touch on the calf of my leg outside the blanket. Very much something a mother would do to make sure a child was warm enough. And soon after, the smell disappeared. I later told my husband that his mom was for sure still in that house. In college, I lived in a small town in Alva, Oklahoma. A friend and I decided one Saturday to go to the local museum. An older woman was leaving as we walked up, and she said she had planned to leave because no one had been by, but was happy to go back in and let us look around. She sat at the front desk in front of a small TV crocheting. We looked around the ground floor and then told her we needed to go to the second floor. She assured us that we had the place to ourselves and we could take our time. The building is so old it had ramps up to the second floor rather than stairs. I also knew that the building used to be a hospital. I hadn't shared this with my friend. Halfway up, I noticed it smelled very distinctly of a hospital. I asked my friend and she agreed that it did smell like fresh disinfectant. We continued up and entered the surgery room. It had a lot of interesting things, and as my friend decided to take some photos, I stood against the wall. There was a display case to my right and the open doorway over my left shoulder. I remember hearing what sounded like someone exhale over my left shoulder. I didn't want to overreact, so I looked around and saw a vent and decided that it probably came from there. I looked back to see my friend watching. She asked if something was wrong and I assured her that everything was fine. And then there was a moan. We both looked at one another and she asked if I had heard it. I said I did and asked if she also heard something, and she had. We left that room and that side of the building. I told her that the museum was an old hospital. Months later, we took her mom to this museum. We didn't tell her mom it was a hospital, and we both noticed there was no smell halfway up the ramp to the second floor this time. However, the second her mom stepped into the surgery room, she suddenly stopped and said, "Oh, people have died in here." I do my best to remain sceptical, but I also feel sometimes there are things beyond my explanation and feelings that I can't shake. So I've learned to trust my intuition, even when it leaves me with my hair standing on end.
I'd say you've got some intuition there that's probably worth trusting.
I think as well that Katrina has ruined sleeping with my leg out of the blanket for me again. I had just gotten over Paranormal Activity.
I will never get over that. Every time I feel like my leg is out of the blanket, it goes back under, whether I'm really hot or not. I'd rather roll the blanket all the way down to my knees so the rest of my body was exposed and have my feet out.
Would you really?
Yeah, absolutely.
It
freaks me out.
But what is it about having your feet out? And it's a universal thing though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like where people go, "Oh, I feel unsafe."
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't know. It's just odd. I've also got a bit of a conspiracy theory based off of Katrina's story for you.
Oh, exciting.
So this isn't an actual conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory of mine. Do you think that all cats are in on the let's scare our owners and make them think it's a paranormal thing?
You own a cat, or rather she owns you.
Mm.
Do you think that she is in on it?
Yes.
Yes, me too. I think she'd love it.
I think sometimes they do see things that we don't see, but I think 9 times out of 10 they're just winding us up.
Most definitely.
Just trying to get our attention.
It's just pure evil behaviour from the cat population. And our second story today comes from Hannah. Let me start off by saying that everyone in my family has a ghost story to tell, and it is a rarity to find a skeptic among us. So when I started seeing ghosts in my Utah home at a very young age, I expected my mother to believe me, but she didn't. Now I've had so many encounters with the spirits in her home that I could really write a novel on them, but I'll try to chop it up to the ones that truly terrified me. The first ghost I ever saw was a little boy, probably about my age or younger at the time. I was 9 or so, and sharing a room with my younger sister, as we are so close in age, we're practically twins. Anyway, we were the kinds of kids that never slept in the dark, so even at the age of 9 and 8, we had a lamp on all night as a nightlight. And not like a little weak lamp in the corner, like a large desk lamp that lit up the whole room. I don't remember what time it was, but it was late, as everyone in the house was asleep. And I was woken up by someone putting their hand on my shoulder and shaking me. I was facing the wall and turned over to see a boy standing by my bed. In my sleepy days, I simply said, "What?" And he looked at me quite seriously and said, "It's time for you to get out." Thinking he meant the bed, I slowly sat up and was somewhat upset about having to give my bed up to him. I didn't recognise the boy, and even now I can't quite describe him to you. All I remember is that when I fully sat up, the boy was gone and the room was empty besides my sleeping sister on her bed. Now I was sure that I had not imagined the boy, and went to my mom's room quickly across the hall, and woke her up and said, "Mom, there's a boy in my room." Now back then she chalked it up to some lucid dream or something, but checked my room for the boy anyway, and finding everything as it was, she put us back to bed. I thought she was right, and perhaps for this instance she was, and I went back to bed too. But what doesn't make sense is everything that happened after. For the next 12 years that I lived in that house, I was constantly seeing things that I couldn't quite explain. It was little things at night, like a man in my room commenting on how much better it looked when I cleaned it, or the same boy who walked through my closet door one night. Then it got worse. At one point, my sister and I were moved down into a large room in the basement that was originally supposed to be a theatre room. Just outside the door to our room was the door to the storage room, which I absolutely hated for some reason. I always thought something lived in there, and he didn't like me at all. I never slept in our new room and was too scared at night to leave the room to go to my mom's room because I didn't want to see whatever waited for me in the storage room. I said this to my mom and she moved me back upstairs almost immediately. I was back in my old room, and my sister was now in the room next to me, and the large basement room was given to my older sister and her fiancé. During this time I slept with less light, just a bunch of Christmas lights hanging from my ceiling. It was now that I started to see the shadow man outside my door. I was 12 or so when I first saw him. I woke up in the middle of the night with my back facing the door and just had that tingly feeling that someone was watching me. I was pretty worried, but not enough that I didn't turn around. As of then, I hadn't seen anything that truly scared me, so I turned to look and I just about shat my pants. The shadow man stood by the corner of the hallway. I can see most of him, but part of his shoulder was hiding behind the corner of the hallway, and I knew that if my mom looked out of her room, she would see him too. It's so hard to describe how he looked, almost like a real person in one of those bodysuits with the edges of him undulating like a lava lamp or swirling like smoke. I was petrified and thought this must be whatever was downstairs in the basement. I didn't dare move and was too scared to yell in case he moved towards me, so I stared at him, barely breathing until I couldn't anymore. I don't know how long I actually stared at him, but he never moved towards my door, he just lingered in the hallway. At one point in the night he did leave, though I don't know where. He kind of just melted off into the darkness, and I mustered up the courage to run into my mom's room, though I turned on the hall light to make sure he was really gone before I did. It took me a really long time, a few months at least, to figure out what he was really. This might sound crazy, but after a while of having him stand outside my door at least once a week, I came to the conclusion that he wasn't there to hurt me. He never gave off the malicious vibes, and was just a constant at night. He never entered my room or even approached my door, and I slowly started to just accept him, and when I would see him I would kindly ask him to go and he would comply. For some reason, there were no real features, but he felt very paternal, like a grandfather, and I had just come to live with it. My mom never saw him, and even after months of me telling her about him, she was still sure that I was just dreaming him up. 3 years ago I was 20 and I moved out of my mother's house with my little sister and moved into a fourplex a few minutes away from my mum's house. The ghosts in my mom's house were one of the reasons that I moved out. We moved into this 3-bedroom apartment with our dog and 2 cats. I was overjoyed because I got a room just for my books and we were finally real adults on our own. At this point, I'd figured out that I was probably a little bit more sensitive to spirits than most, to the point that I can regularly see them. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's the only way to explain the things that I've seen. I knew the things that went through our apartment and was constantly asking them to leave if they were doing things I didn't appreciate. For example, the old man attached to a chair in my library was welcome to stay. My cat adored him and was constantly in his chair. The woman who walked up and down my hallway panting like she couldn't breathe was gone not too long after arriving. But there was this thing. I can't describe it other than it was very tall and white and loved to peek around corners at us. My sister had seen it, and guests that had come over had seen it. I only asked it to leave when it wore my sister's face. Unsurprisingly, this happened at night while I was asleep. But always your guard is down from things when you're sleeping. I was woken up when my blankets were thrown off my legs and I sat straight up in bed. My sister was stood at the bottom of the bed and had thrown the blankets off me. Her eyes were wide and she looked scared for some reason. I thought that maybe she had seen a spider or something on me and was trying to get it off. I yelled at her asking her what it was, but she didn't answer. She just waved her hands in the air and turned and ran out of my room back to hers. I jumped out of my bed and followed her, wanting to know what she had seen and why she had been such a dick to leave me to deal with it by myself. As I walked into her room, I was shocked to find her in bed, wrapped up in blankets, with our cat lying square on her back. Something that wouldn't have happened in the span of a few seconds. I didn't tell her about what I saw to this day, 3 years later, and I don't even know if she knows. We stayed in that apartment for 2 years and had our fair share of visitors from the other side, but we were sure to send them on their way. And in case you're worried that I dreamt the whole thing, I can assure you I didn't, because my dog saw it too.
What was the tall white thing? I'm not feeling that at all. That sounds so creepy.
Very alarming.
Wearing her sister's face as well.
Doubly alarming.
Yeah, not good.
Not down for that. Although I do understand the illogical nature of sleep. So, you know, when you wake up suddenly and somebody's at the end of your bed and you're still half asleep, so you end up like saying or thinking really silly things.
Yeah.
Like, oh, she's clearly getting a spider off me. Why is she in your room in the first place? But your brain does that. I'm trying to rationalise this, but I'm not really fully on board, so I don't really understand what's happening.
Maybe her sister has some kind of weird version of spider sense where instead of turning into Spider-Man, she just senses when spiders are on her sister and has to go and get rid of them.
And on a scale of useless superpowers, that's pretty high up on the list.
I'm also very intrigued as to where the little boy wanted her to go.
Or whether he did just want the bed. He was like,
maybe he just wants the
do
bed.
you know what, I'm sick of this, I want to have a nice lie down. All this haunting has really tired me out.
Also, on the scale of scary things to experience, obviously child ghosts are quite high up there anyway, and started with a little boy ghost, so that's not good. Then we move into the territory of the tall white thing, but then she just casually mentions that there's a woman that pants.
Oh,
that's a horrifying thing. That's
was
probably
the most
scariest
horrific part of that story, I think. It honestly, when I read it, it made my arms and legs go all prickly. Like, I don't... Oh my... If you're lying in bed and you hear a...
Yeah, that's like the worst thing. Like, it's not the worst thing, because the tall white thing and the...
No, for me, the
child,
panting lady is the worst thing.
It was... Now, I'm not saying she's flippant, because she's obviously very, in touch with the other side and obviously experiences lots of different things, but that one would be definitely not just be putting that in casually.
As an aside.
Or walking up and down panting. No, I'm not feeling that.
It's like something from a possession film. Do you know what it's like? Remember that film we watched with the older lady who was sundowning?
Yeah.
Where she was running up and down the corridor at night time doing like weird stuff and making weird noises. That's what I saw in my head.
But also panting's a bit Midsummer-esque as well, isn't it? With the...
Yes, it is. Yeah, they have a whole panting and breathing whole thing that I never really understood.
It's just a soundscape scary, isn't it?
Oh, is it?
I think so.
Probably. And our third story today comes from Shayna. I grew up in an old brick house in upstate New York. It was built in the early 1900s. My dad is Catholic and my mom's Christian, so I suppose there was talk of spiritual things, though my mom was adamant that ghosts weren't real. I was always curious about paranormal things from a very young age and often pestered my parents for scary stories. It was common for my two little brothers especially to see shadow figures walking through the dining room to the living room, for me to feel icky in certain places of the house, mostly the third floor, which I swear felt like a totally different house altogether, and to hear odd creaks and bumps, typical creepy old house things. I have an odd memory of a woman who looked like my mother, tall, thin, with long dark hair, but that definitely wasn't my mother, standing in the corner of my room. I don't know if it was a dream or a figment of my childhood imagination. I don't know what it was, but this memory has stuck with me and frankly I don't like it. Things got extra strange one night while we were having a sleepover with my childhood best friend. We were about 12. I woke with a start. You know when you wake up sharply aware, with no sense of grogginess, like you haven't been sleeping at all, in the middle of the night? All the lights in the room were on, and my closet door, which had been shut, was open just a crack. I hate this memory, so here it goes. I heard a woman's voice saying my name. It was warm and coaxing, almost sing-songy. Naturally, I thought Jane was pranking me, so I kicked her to tell her to knock it off. But she didn't move because she was dead asleep. I kicked her again, harder this time. I was saying her name too, but she wouldn't wake up. I turned towards the closet and hear the voice calling my name again. Shayna. I hear it maybe 3 or 4 more times. This warm, maternal-sounding voice that I unfortunately can hear in my head to this day. It definitely sounds like it was coming from the closet. And as I stared, my vision narrowed, and I feel almost like I was being pulled in closer. I snapped out of it, slammed my head into the pillow, buried myself in the blankets, and fell back asleep. Nothing like that has happened since, and I hope it stays that way. I was definitely an imaginative kid, and I've absolutely considered the possibility of this being a lucid dream, but I experienced it as a very real and very shocking moment that I would spend my teenage years trying to forget.
You got to stop with these voices. You're just freaking me out.
Freak myself out sometimes when I'm doing those voices.
See, I'm really concerned about this story because I don't know whether it's like some kind of mimicry, and mimicry scares me. Like the idea that something might mimic you to lull you into a false sense of security. Like, what are their plans?
Or mimic your mum.
Yeah, what are the plans?
that is very scary because as a child, in most circumstances, your mum is that person of warmth, of comfort, of joy. And if she called you in the night, you would go to her. If she's calling you in the night from your closet, don't go to her. There's the rules.
Unless your mum frequently goes into your closet and stays there, in which case you might be okay. But yeah, it's very unnerving story, I feel, because of that whole like, what's the purpose and where is Shayna being lured to?
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's not the first time we've had a story where somebody has heard something from their closet that has felt like it was drawing them in. Fuck that.
Maybe Narnia is short of a few people and it's actually some kind of recruitment exercise.
Very badly thought out recruitment exercise. I keep saying this, if there's a PR person in the afterlife, they're not doing their job very well.
Well, I feel like if Narnia is short of people, like the easiest way to get people to go would be, hey, you can travel and move around freely in Narnia.
Oh, right now. I'd probably even go.
Yeah, I don't like this. It's giving me the hujubas because I just can imagine the voice calling out and the woman looking like her mother as well is very odd. Like, what is going on there?
And story number 4 comes from Myra. You mentioned something about dreaming you were in the same room you fell asleep in and said you would love to hear from people if they had experiences like that. It happened to me about a year ago. I lived in a tiny home and slept in a loft above the main living room. I fell asleep upstairs and in my dream I woke up just below the loft. I had dozed off in the corner of the room next to my guitar. I remember feeling confused because I fully remembered falling asleep in the loft. I looked up and there was a tall shadow person standing in the doorway and they seemed sad. It reminded me of my friend, but I was never sure who it actually was. It didn't do anything, but I was still afraid because there was a huge shadow person right by the front door. I told it that it was not welcome there and it had to leave. And I'm pretty sure I woke up then and promptly went back to sleep. I've always had pretty vivid dreams and I can actually still remember dreams I had when I was 4. As a child, I had night terrors every night. My parents thought I was dying every time I screamed. We lived in a house that was over 100 years old and I always said I saw a man in a suit and a topcoat roaming the halls. I could have chalked it up to my wild imagination and I still sometimes do. However, my sister and her friends have told me that they all saw the same guy. He would walk down the hallway towards a brightly lit window. Some of her friends didn't tell me about him until a decade later and I was surprised that our stories lined up, as I figured I had made him up. My mom also said that while she didn't believe in ghosts, there was one part of that house where she would always smell lavender. None of us had lavender perfume, and so she thought it was so strange. My other sister, who was much older, said she always felt like people were watching her as she slept. The weirdest things didn't even happen in that house, but in the one we moved into when I was about 10. All of the occurrences happened within 1 year of living there, and I'm not sure if it was my own energy shifting, perhaps as I entered puberty, but I had some pretty vivid experiences that I cannot discount. I know they were real, and I was entirely lucid for all of them. The first was on Easter morning. I'd woken up at around 3 a.m. to set up a treasure hunt for my mother that would lead her from one part of the house to another until she reached her prize, which was probably a piece of candy or something of that nature. On my way back to my room, I was greeted by my cat. At first, I was happy to see her, and then I realised it was strange because she slept with my sister who always closed her bedroom door. I looked up and indeed, her door was closed. I looked back down, and a grin stretched across my cat's face, like the Cheshire cat, and she turned and ran down to the end of the hallway, disappearing into the closed closet door. I swear this happened, as I was of sound mind and consciousness, but I think I saw my cat astral projecting. The next occurrence happened probably within a few months of this. I was sleeping in my mother's bed, and as I woke up from a totally normal dream where I was just sitting across the table from my sister talking, I saw a figure at the end of my bed. It was very vivid. It was a young man, maybe in his early 20s. He wore a baseball cap or a snapback, dressed in very modern clothes. I sat there unable to move or speak for about a minute, just staring at him as he stared back, before shaking my mom to wake up. As soon as she began to come to, he was pulled into the closet and disappeared. In hindsight, I think it could have been a friend of mine that dresses similarly. But it would mean that he astral travelled to me, but wound up in a different time, as he would be dressing like that now 10 years later. I didn't know him at this time, so I didn't recognise the man, but now it makes sense to me. Other strange things happened during the night in that house. I struggled to fall asleep, and in these bouts of insomnia I would stare out the window and watch the stars. I would pretty much meditate on one star until everything else disappeared, and I used to swear I could see little sparks flying between stars like space battles. One night I saw lights outside. I sat up to look out the window and watched a small craft fly through the yard. It was the height of the fruit trees and moving slowly. It was only about 12 feet in diameter. It could have been a drone, but I didn't know they existed back then, around 2010. And I doubted myself even because it felt impossible, but I know what I saw. I feel again that I may have entered another dimension through the star meditation. I feel this only because a few weeks ago I dreamt I was in bed staring at the stars, and within 30 seconds it was like a veil was dropped and the sky held thousands of spaceships. I am very New Age spiritual, so I feel that this was showing me how many higher dimensional beings are present at this time to help humans overcome the old paradigm. There were 3 more strange occurrences in the aforementioned home. Once my mother said I was speaking another language in my sleep that she couldn't recognise. She said it could have been Chinese. Since I've already told you I'm New Age spiritual, I feel like I may have been channeling light language, as angelic spirits come into me in my dreams. Another weird occurrence happened when I fell asleep on the couch. I don't remember this, but my mother said she heard screaming, and when she came out I had knocked over the lamp and thrown the blankets and the pillows everywhere. All I remember is running to the end of the hallway to give my mother a big hug and then jumping into her bed. I was terrified. I don't remember what I was dreaming. I'd only sleepwalked one other time years before, and hadn't had a night terror in almost a decade. Within a few months of that, she also said I stood in her doorway and watched her sleep one night, that she could hear the ice in my water glass clinking. I remember perfectly, though, walking to the kitchen to fill my water and returning promptly to my room without stopping. My final story for you happened at the house we moved to for my senior year of high school. I couldn't sleep and was out on the deck smoking a cigarette. Suddenly I saw these green lights flashing in a tree about half a block away. I was stunned and could do nothing but stare at them. They stopped flashing, and a moment later were in a tree just across the street from me, and then they disappeared for good. I have not seen them since, but a friend of mine had told me months before this happened that he had seen something similar, a few different times, and always in the trees. I think they were nature spirits like fairies. I read that they come to you when you're in need of healing, and that would make sense for me as I was in a really unhealthy place at the time. That's all I have for you. I haven't seen much lately, but for little sparks of light that I believe are angelic spirits, and the occasional dark sparks that are lower vibrational energies.
There's so much going on in Myra's story, like very much clearly in touch with things, in touch with the spiritual realm is what I want to say. Although I also feel like you might be like first point of contact for aliens as well, because there is a lot of contact, lots of things you're seeing. I'm particularly intrigued by the astral projecting cat.
No, I didn't like that. That freaked me out so much. Seeing it grinning at you.
Yeah.
No.
But only because it made me wonder, you know, like in really old paintings where they're like, you know, like they're
the Renaissance paintings,
yeah, like,
where
they're spectacular until they get to drawing an animal, and then the animal just looks really bizarre.
Like they've never seen an animal before.
Yeah, maybe they've just been seeing projected, like they're paintings of projections of animal spirits.
So you're telling me that back in Renaissance periods, cats projected themselves to look hideous, to look monstrous, and bizarre.
Yeah,
interesting.
But that's what it reminds me of. That's what I pictured, one of those animals when started smiling, because I was just like, it's so. Like dogs, I've seen dogs smile. Like they tend to do that by accident. It's just because they're jowly, I guess.
And they're baring their teeth.
Yeah. Whereas you don't tend to see it from cats, do you? Because they've got a little tiny mouth. Well, our cat has got a very tiny mouth. But yeah, it's very unusual. Is it uncanny valley? Is that the right thing? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for it to run through a closed door as well, obviously.
Also very uncanny valley.
I'm also intrigued by the lights, though.
Oh, I'm not. I don't need to know anything more about it.
No, I thought you might say that.
It was a drone. It was all a drone.
It was always a drone.
Yeah, 2010, doesn't matter. It was all drones. That's it. I don't know what I'd do if I was out smoking a cigarette and I saw lights in the sky.
You wouldn't acknowledge it. You'd see it and then your brain would tell you, nope, I'm not dealing with this. And you just get back to whatever you were thinking about previously.
I think I would.
Yeah.
I think I'd just be like, I'm ignoring any of this is happening.
Yep. And then the beam would come down and it'd start projecting you up off the decking and you'd be like, no, this is something.
No, I'm still sitting on my deck and smoking
Yeah.
a cigarette. I'm not being beamed up into a spaceship. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find everything you need to know about us on reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. You can submit your own story to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content. And on that note, we shall see you next week.
Bye.